Good morning, everybody. I hope you're doing well. My name's Dan Fellows. I'm working with MONIN today to make some delicious non-alcoholic coffee drinks. So we're all locked inside at the moment. We're restricted with our movements. We're not able to go to coffee shops, not able to go to bars, which is punishing for everybody. But what we're going to do is make a couple of drinks that you can really easily make at home. Very simple, just a couple of ingredients. So most of the drinks today can be substituted for whatever means of making coffee you have. If I'm talking about espresso, we can talk capsules. We can work with a mocha pot. If I'm talking about a filter coffee, you could use a cafetiere, you could use a kind of V60 pour-over method. Just because I'm using one particular method, it's just because it's what I have at home. But all of these recipes are completely adaptable. It's more about the flavor profiles and the balance you get within the drinks. It's essentially something that can be changed, slightly adjusted, whatever your favorite syrup is or flavor profile. You can choose a coffee or you can choose a syrup that combines well with that. So the first drink I'm going to make is espresso based. What we're going to do is dial in the coffee. I always recommend with starting around about a 1-to-2 ratio. So however much ground coffee you put in, aiming for about double that in the cup. So, espresso. We don't all have beautiful coffee machines and amazing grinders in our homes, but that's not to stop us making coffee with a similar intensity and strength to espresso. So I'm going to be using that 18 grams of coffee. The one thing you do need for dialing in espresso is scales. It just means if you make the best cup of coffee you've ever had, you can make it again. I'm going to add this to my basket. And then what we want to do, just kind of level the coffee out so it's nice and even, and it's going to extract kind of evenly across the whole bed. You want to make sure it's nice and level, so I use push tampers. This just means we get a nice level bed. But as long as you get this, a nice level, flat bed of coffee with the correct amount of coffee, we're in business. And give it a little clean up, just because we don't want to make our machine dirty. Another important thing, give it a little flush. This just gets rid of all the old coffee glass through. And then, brew my shot. So I want this to happen in around 25 to 32 seconds, there or thereabouts. So if you wanted your shot to run slower, you could grind finer. It would take longer to come through. If you wanted it to run a little bit quicker, you could grind coarser and it would come through a little bit faster. The first thing I always do with a capsule machine is try and treat it as much as I can like an espresso machine. So obviously it's a much lower dose. So I think it's around 6 grams per capsule. You could always put 2 capsules in if you wanted a bit more coffee and a bit more intensity. What we want to do, give it a little flush through first. So rather than putting your capsules straight in the top, just pour one empty shot. And what this will do is just clean out any of that old coffee that's sitting inside the machine. So, capsule in. Again, whatever your favourite capsule is, you can adjust your syrup accordingly. We're going to do the macadamia with the espresso. And then I'm going to use salted caramel for the capsule. I like to have these in my freezer, which during a lockdown isn't that easy because we're trying to keep food in there. But if you can freeze your glasses, even better. Just means the drink's going to be as cold as possible. I've preloaded with ice. I'm going to build the espresso. This one is going to be our macadamia. This one will be our salted caramel and capsule. So espresso in. That's a good sound. By having the ice in the glass really cold as well, it will slow down that dilution because it's already very cold. And then got a capsule in here. Next up, macadamia, 15 mils. Again, this is something that adjusts accordingly. I like 15 mil, I think. I have a relatively sweet tooth. If you didn't want too much sweetness but just the flavour coming through, you could do maybe 10 or 5. If you want it to be a really kind of sweet dessert-like drink, up it to 15, 20, maybe 25, whatever you fancy. And then salted caramel, which will go in our capsule. So give it a little stir. to mix that together. The syrup will always go to the bottom just because it's heavier, and we just want to give it a little mix in. And now, basically, just top it up with as much milk as you like. I do like about 150 mils. And again, shop local. Local milk wherever you can get it. Okay. You can see it looks very fancy when you put it together. But that's not going to be a great thing to drink because the syrup's on the bottom with the coffee, the milk's on top. Either use a straw or give it a little mix. And give mine a mix. And then the second drink, you could make this with alternative milk, whether you fancy oat or pea or macadamia. All these things are really nice options. Coconut works really nicely. So really simple, kind of elegant, delicious way of making iced coffee. So there we have it. Nice and cold, nice and refreshing. This is my capsule one as well. You can see the difference. It's a little bit less dark because we've got less of the brewed coffee in there. Still delicious, a little bit more mild. Oh, the salted caramel is really good. So that's espresso and capsules. Key things, make your coffee and your equipment that you're brewing as clean as possible. Obviously we want to keep everything as spick and span as we can. Clean your machine whenever you can. And then the next one is, again, really, really nice for a hot day, probably a bit more luxurious. This is going to be a popcorn affogato, because who doesn't love popcorn? Who doesn't love affogato? So I've been making popcorn this morning on my hob, which is quite cool. Just pop it in a pan, a little bit of salt, a little bit of sugar. Easiest thing in the world to make. I've got my ice cream ready to go. So I've just portioned this up. I'm going to leave this in the freezer. You can have these ready to go. And for this, I'm going to be making a mock espresso. So this is using what's called an Aeropress, which is basically a massive syringe. So here we have it. So you have two sections which come apart. You can use it two ways. You can have the bottom section this way, and you put the coffee and the water in the top, put your lid on, flip it, and then press it through. Or, to keep it a little bit more simple, just put your cap on, fill it up in this chamber, and then press it through, so down like that. I'm going to use what's called the inverted method, where we have this way up, cap off, build it in here, and then normally, well, the nice thing about this brewer is you can make anything from filter strength, which is obviously a little bit lighter, a little bit less coffee to water, right through to what's almost espresso strength. Filter coffee, we use a recipe of around 60 grams of coffee per litre of water. So in here you can maybe do 15 grams of coffee to 250 grams of water if you wanted to have that kind of low intensity filter kind of strength. But what I'm going to do is kind of hack it a little bit. I'm going to use much more coffee, so 20 grams, and then 100 grams of water. So this is going to be at 96 degrees. Coffee obviously soaks up a bit of water when you're extracting. Roughly 1 gram of coffee will soak up 2 grams of water, and a gram and a mil of water are the same. So by adding 20 grams of coffee, I would expect to soak up about 40, and the remaining amount is going to be 60 grams. So 20 grams of coffee, 100 grams of water, we're going to soak up about 40, so we'll get about 60 grams in the end. Yeah, so paper filters are great. I'm using the metal filter. Lets a few more of those kind of fines through, get a little bit more body and a little bit more mouthfeel. Grinding it the same grind size as my espresso, so really, really fine. Going to be using 20 grams finely ground coffee. Again, this is easily made with pre-ground coffee. I always recommend grinding your beans fresh if you can, but it's a bit difficult to get hold of things at the moment, so whatever you can get your hands on. We'll pop that into the Aeropress. And I just want to leave enough space for about 100 mils of water. So I've learned in the past, don't overflow these. I overfilled it in the World Championship Finals in 2012, got coffee into the rim of the Aeropress, couldn't get the lid on, had an absolute shocker. So from that day forward, I've always learnt leave a little bit of space. And then I'll get my popcorn ready. So this popcorn syrup is just really, really nice. Really kind of natural flavours. I'm going to add that to the jug that I'm brewing into. Again, the recipe calls for 20 mils. If you want it to be a little bit sweeter, add a little bit more. If you want it to be a little bit less sweet, add a little bit less. This is probably one of my favourite syrups that MONIN do. I love popcorn. I actually prefer this syrup to actual popcorn. I can eat a little bit of popcorn and it's fine, but this I think is really interesting. It works really well in drinks like old fashions. Anything with a kind of nutty flavour profile, or even like a jammy flavour profile, it works really nicely with. Got our syrup in the jug, which I'm going to be pressing into. And I'm going to steep this for 1 minute. So again, you don't need all this fancy equipment. I have a temperature controlled kettle, but a regular kettle does a similar job. So give that a little stir. When you're making filter coffee, always just make sure the coffee and the water are all quite nicely mixed. You don't want to stir too much because it will risk over extracting, but just make sure all the coffee is in contact with water. I'm going to put that cap on. So these caps don't come with the Aeropress, but you can order them online. You want to give it a good press. I'm doing that over the syrup. Oh God, I fell down the stairs, as you can see. Slipped on the bottom step. Isolation life. There we go. So, give that a good press. You can hear that's all done. And now we've got around about 60 mils of coffee, hot, in the jug, with that nice popcorn syrup. And then I'm going to pour that over the ice cream. So this would make 2. I'm going to prepare 1 now, and then you have a little bit left over. So here's the popcorn I made earlier. I'm going to add a little bit to the ramekin. And then it's a little bit nice, so just pour the hot coffee and popcorn over the ice cream. And there we have a popcorn affogato. And like I say, this coffee can be substituted for espresso. It can be substituted for cafetiere coffee. Whatever means of making coffee you have, fine. Maybe just make it a little bit stronger so you get that intensity. You don't want it to be too watery and kind of overpowered by the ice cream. So 2 schools of thought with affogatos. 1, eat it like this. Another one, get a whisk or a spoon. And then if you mix it all together, you get kind of, it's a bit low, I won't adjust my camera too much. But if you mix it and combine them, it gives like a really nice kind of creamy milkshake texture. One for outdoors. And there we have the popcorn affogato. That's so good. It's cooled down nicely as well. Bit of popcorn. And the final drink is a bit more of a light drink. So this one is using MONIN Pink Peppercorn syrup. It's a mouthful. Which is really good. It's got that kind of, I wouldn't say heat of pepper, but it's just got a really nice kind of aromatic, just really refreshing, a little bit floral, a little bit of peppercorn. Just works really nicely with a bit brighter coffee. So I'm going to be using a different coffee for this today. Here we go. Wash process coffee. And this means that the coffee, before it's processed, it's picked off the tree as a coffee cherry. Some people leave this in the cherry and let the fruit kind of dry, which gives it a bit more of the kind of fruit flavor. If you remove all of this fruit before drying it, this is called the washed process, and this gives you a much more citric, kind of clean citric cup as well. So I'm gonna be using this. I'm gonna grind it 20 grams once again, but I'm gonna change my grind size. So I'm gonna go much coarser. What you wanna do with any kind of filter coffee maker, if it has paper, just give it a little wash first just to rinse out the paper, get rid of any kind of papery tastes. Literally just pour it in, and then pour it out again. So this also does a pretty good job of kind of adhering the paper to the brewer so you don't get any kind of collapsing. Drip through. And then we're going to add coffee and water, and then this drink is a Pink Peppercorn Coffee Tonic. So really, really refreshing. Coffee and tonic is quite a popular combination. Although it seems like what people think are two bitter ingredients probably wouldn't work well with each other. The bitterness of coffee and tonic combine really, really nicely, really refreshingly. You also get the sweetness of both and the kind of acidity. And I'm going to be bolstering that with a little bit of grapefruit as well today, because I've got one in the fridge. So, filter coffee. Again, using the scales just to make sure it's accurate. Add our coffee. Add our water. So we're going to be using 240 grams of water. And again, that's all online. And I like to give it a little stir, again, just to make sure it's nicely mixed together. We don't want any dry coffee just sitting there not extracting, you see. So again, just mixing it to make sure all of the coffee is extracting evenly. Bring it into the carafe. And we're aiming for a contact time of around about 2.5 minutes. If you have it a little bit less brew time, you'll get less extraction of coffee flavors. So you might have a little bit more brightness, a little bit more acidity. If you extract a little bit more, you might get a bit more sweetness, a bit more kind of moving towards bitterness. So again, this is a very broad outline. Whatever you think is the best recipe for your coffee, that's what you can use. And then I'm going to be combining that 50 mils of the brewed coffee with 10 mils of peppercorn syrup. So I've got this here. So good. Use this one actually. So you can see the lovely colour of the peppercorn syrup. Kind of really natural, light pink. It smells so good. Pink peppercorns are just so good to cook with as well. But I don't have any, otherwise I'd use them to garnish. So once again, got my frozen glass in the freezer. See, everything ought to be nice and cold, there's ice already in there. Gonna add my 10 mils of peppercorn syrup. So this is hot, so you could chill this down first, or you could use cold brew coffee, that'd be easy enough as well. And then I'm gonna add 50 mils. And this is probably not really a coffee forward drink. It has elements of the coffee that bring complexity, balance to the drink, but it's not an obviously coffee drink. So these, obviously the drinks we had earlier were kind of variation on iced lattes, affogatos. This is probably more of a cocktail-y flavour profile. When I make this drink for people, they assume it's got alcohol in it just because it has those almost botanical notes. So we've got the coffee in there, we've got the peppercorn. I'm just going to add a little bit of tonic. I usually add about 100 mils of tonic, but again, however much you like, you can add. Once again, give it a little mix just to make sure it's nicely combined. And then a little bit of grapefruit over the top of the drink just adds a little bit of citrus and also complements the colour really nicely. So there we have Pink Grapefruit Coffee Tonic. Cheers. That's so different. So when you have these two drinks, well probably even these two, side by side, completely different, really, really kind of decadent and rich and kind of luxurious, whereas this is more refreshing, kind of sitting outside in the sunshine, really clean flavour profile. So all of the recipes are online. There's going to be more of these masterclasses in the next another one in 2 weeks with myself and Kenji. So hopefully we're out of isolation and lockdown soon so we can do it in other places. But in the meantime, hopefully you are a bit inspired to make some coffee and MONIN cocktails, non-alcoholic. We can also add alcohol to these. This one works really well with gin. And then yeah, keep checking back. There's going to be a lot more content coming this way. So I hope you're all keeping safe, keeping well. I'm going to go and wash my hands again and probably drink a few of these. So I hope you all have a really, really nice day. Stay in touch and I'll see you again next time.